So there is a serious problem in this country, and it stems from the media. Now, I've done a video on this before, but nothing's changed. If anything, things have gotten worse. There was a time when journalism meant reporting the truth, uncovering things that were buried, that were hidden away, and that the public should really know about but doesn't. Now it's got to the point, at least with the majority of mainstream journalism and mainstream media in this country, where it's protecting people, where it's protecting politicians, but only if they're rich enough. So, case in point, if a politician lies, well, then they should be called out for that. Recently, Boris Johnson put out a tweet responding to, I think it was the Telegraph, saying something along the lines of, "Fear not, Brexit will happen. Sooner or later it's going to happen, and when it does happen, then we can put money into our education and our police and our NHS." Every single credible journalist in this country, every single news media outlet should be shredding that piece of shit, because it is an outright lie. Boris Johnson is one of many Conservatives who have voted consistently to cut the NHS, to cut education, to divert public money going to public schools and send it to private schools, to cut funding for fire and rescue, to raise taxes on NHS buildings, which has happened again this year. And now private hospitals get to class themselves as a charity so that they don't have to pay tax at all. And yet he's saying that it's because we're in the European Union. That is a lie, a grotesque lie, and it's not being called out. Theresa May gets up in Parliament. Now, the notion that you would call a member of Parliament a liar, let alone the Prime Minister, is shocking, because politicians aren't supposed to lie, certainly not in the Houses of Commons, not in Parliament. Yet Theresa May gets up and says outlandish lies like no government before has ever put so much into education. Well, we can break that down. Do you mean since you got into number 10, Theresa? Because you've done a hell of a job cutting education. Schools across the country publicly said, just over half a year ago now, we cannot afford to stay open for 5 full days a week because you've cut us. And then, of course, Philip Hammond cut education again. Or maybe she meant Conservatives in general, but even then, David Cameron's government was cutting funding to education. Esther McVey and Amber Rudd promote universal credits despite story after story, case after case, study after study, finding that universal credits is doing far more damage than any good whatsoever. And yet they get away with it because for the most part they're not being challenged. Now, this is partly to do with the media, because again, if you're worth your salt, regardless of what side of the political spectrum you are on, if someone lies, you should make it blatantly obvious that they are a liar. Whenever someone brings up Nigel Farage to me, I make it painfully aware that he is a fucking hypocrite. If you hate the EU so much, don't be a member of the European Parliament. Because despite the millions you've made from being a member of the European Parliament, you don't represent the United Kingdom. You've never represented the United Kingdom. You don't take part in those debates. You don't take part in those policies. And it's not because you haven't got a chair there. it's because you can't be asked to do your fucking job. So it's partly to do with the media, and the fact that the media refuses to call out liars, unless, of course, they have a little bit of progressive backbone. And then it falls onto the rest. The people like Amber Rudd, the people like Anna Salisbury, the litter of Blairites that are still within the Labour Party, who don't want change, who want the status quo to stay as it is, who want those further devastating blows to the working and middle class, while the upper classes get to do whatever the hell they want because they were fortunate enough to be born into rich families. The media in this country have failed us repeatedly. There is only so much longer people can actually stand by and give in to this. We've seen over the last couple of years a number of esteemed and established journalists have left organisations like the BBC because they've been so disgusted with how the BBC now reacts to the news. If it's that damaging to Theresa May or to the Conservative Party, they won't publish it. The BBC has this common reputation of being very much for the EU, and yet they gave so much time in the last few days to Nigel Farage and his Hippocratic, bullshit, self-serving notion of his new Brexit party. UKIP largely fails because aside from wanting to leave the EU, they're just a copy of the Conservatives. And Nigel Farage's fundamental principles are conservative. Cut education, cut the NHS, cut police, put it all into private, and if you haven't got the money to pay for it, well, fuck you. Condemns career politicians, yet he is a career politician, and that's made him a fortune. And again, the media has failed this country because they're not pointing this stuff out. Jacob Rees-Mogg still comes out and lies about WTO, and there are still people who buy into it because mainstream media refuses to say, no, that piece of shit is lying to you. At this point, why would you follow these news organisations and give them any kind of credibility when you have things like the Canary? Now, I reference it a few times, and it's where I tend to report a lot of my stories from. But again, it's an independent news organisation that doesn't cover up for people when they lie. And yet the BBC, they've lost the credibility that they once had. So is Sky News, so is ITV. ITV that used to be the channel of Sir Trevor McDonald and is now got the proud face of someone who hacked into a dead girl's phone and then fucked off to America to avoid the heat. Made a failure of it over there and came back when it all died down. Is it any wonder people can't trust the honest politicians left?